Welcome to Fantasy Football Today, Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined by Dan the Man. He's not Dan on the can. Dan Schneier. He is Dan the Manifesto, railing over the Giants' most recent victory. Dan, the regular season, the championships are over for most people, and this is when it's our time to shine here in the Dynasty fantasy football world.
Yeah, it's an exciting time for Dynasty football. I've been talking to a lot of friends. They're like, when are you going back on Dynasty FFT? And I'm like, good news. It's coming soon because we want to talk about this coming season. We want to talk about the changes in Dynasty. And there's a couple interesting questions I saw on the rundown, Heath, that I'm really excited to get into today. So this is the best part about Dynasty. Like you get to carry it over through what is Dynasty? Essentially a 10, 11 month like there's barely any time you're taking off in the Dynasty game.
I have like the YOLO League. Just finished last night, and by the way, I won it.
Congrats.
Thank you, appreciate it. But I was setting my lineup this morning for week 1 next year. Like looking at it, I was like, okay, so I've got Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon and Devontae Adams and Keenan Allen. I got some old guys, Travis Kelce. But man, like what young guys am I going to have for next year? I'm looking at my picks in other leagues. I don't have any picks in YOLO. That's why I won the championship. But I'm looking at my picks in other leagues. I'm getting excited about the rookie draft, that Jacob Gibbs tight end premium league that he started. I have the 1st, 6th, and 7th pick next year in the rookie draft. I'm excited about that. I'm so thankful for this format that we just get to keep playing all year round. And we've got something special for you today. I want to do more of this in 2025. It's my resolution. We're going to ask Dan for his Dynasty resolution here in just a moment. But it's my resolution is to give you guys, the FFT Dynasty listeners, and those of you here watching on YouTube, a little sneak peek at the Dynasty content that's coming out. Tomorrow, on January 1st, New Year's Day, I will have fully updated 2025 Dynasty rankings for quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. We'll have a fully updated Superflex and 1QB trade charts for 2025. And today, we're going to unveil the top 12 at each position. I've got some questions for Dan. He will tell me, he'll tell me where I've gone wrong, hopefully. And, I say I'm unveiling the top 12. Maybe Dan will change my mind and it'll look a little bit different when we get to the rankings being published tomorrow. But we always start, after I talk for 2.5 minutes, with 3 questions for our guest. Dan, looking back at 2024, who's the one player who really changed your mind in Dynasty?
I think you can probably guess this one, Heath. It's Bo Nix. I mean, how could it not be? Bo Nix was a player who has changed my mind so much, Heath, that I didn't do this for any other player in this class because I didn't have time to or care to, but I was curious enough to do this. Go back and look at his tape from Oregon from the last season. And I went back and I looked at it and I was like, you know what? And I remember when I was evaluating him, I was like, he does make some interesting throws off platform when he's forced to move. I'm like, he does have interesting velocity in that intermediate level and that short area. But I'm like, I was just worried so much about that system has no carryover to the NFL. What's it going to be like when he faces NFL defenses? And B, the deep arm and the talent in the deep half. Now, on those 2 questions, one, he went to the perfect scenario, right? Sean Payton, an unbelievable head coach and somebody who has obviously designed a system that fits his skill set really well. And then B, on the deep half, he's made some throws that have been really impressive on the deep half this year. He's missed some. He's missed a lot of throws this year, too. A lot of quarterbacks miss throws. And I knew that was going to be part of his game. But there's no way for me not to move him up so high from where I had him in Dynasty, Heath, because 1, he's made a lot of big throws. 2, he's with the perfect fit from a schematic standpoint. And 3, he runs. He runs a lot more than he did at Oregon, back to kind of the Auburn days. So for me, it's easily Bo Nix. And they're just going to build around him at this point with a lot of cap space that's going to clear up with Russ clearing up, that Russ contract clearing up. So that's the one for me.
I love that answer. We're going to see if he made my top 12 here in just a little bit. But if you're just looking at the rookies, where would he be ranked amongst the rookie quarterbacks? Ooh. So you've got Jaden Daniels, you've got Caleb Williams, you've got Drake May, you've got Michael Penix, and you've got JJ McCarthy. Where does Bo Nix fit into that group?
This question is exactly why Dynasty is the most fun game, because you have to project so much with JJ McCarthy. And Penix we're getting a little glimpse of. I think, though, I'm really impressed with Bo Nix to the point where I would put him as my QB4. I wouldn't have him over Drake May without a doubt. Obviously Jaden, and then Caleb I'm not moving past, but I would have him as QB4 ahead of JJ, who I didn't have him ahead of previously, and then ahead of Penix, who I already had him ahead of.
So we'll give a little glimpse as to what is to come, because you've seen the top 12s, and I want to know who is the breakout player for 2025 that did not make my top 12 at any of the 4 positions.
Oh, this is a fun one too to answer. I narrowed it. This is a tough one. I narrowed it down to 3 players.
Oh wow.
Sorry,
okay.
3 players, and I have a wild card pick that is
Okay.
not going to be that, but I want to name shout him. So the 3 players I narrowed it down to were Zay Flowers, Xavier Worthy, and Jamison Williams. As far as picking one of those guys goes, if I had to, for me, it would be Zay Flowers. And the reason I would say Zay Flowers is because I just believe in that rapport getting even stronger between him and Lamar Jackson. I do think back to what I saw on his Boston College tape where he was winning with double moves on the vertical plane. He was open and they weren't getting the football. I still think that part of his game needs to be unlocked with Lamar Jackson, and can be, especially in that system. So for me, it's Zay Flowers if I had to pick it, but I'd be just as happy with Worthy and Jamison Williams, especially thinking that both those guys are the talents I saw on tape. Worthy having that end of season run, kind of like a Rashee Rice. I know Rice will be back in the mix, but Worthy has a different skill set. And then the wild card for me, Heath, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I just like what I've seen from a little bit of tape I've watched, and I think he's going to be surprising people. It's Keon Coleman. That's somebody I'm going to be trying to buy in all my dynasty leagues this offseason. I think I can get him at a decent price.
So I'm gonna do something here, and I'm gonna give those of you in the YouTube chat, and I know some of you are watching on Twitter. If you are and you want to ask a question, you got to come over, watch on YouTube, and then enter the question there in the chat. But Dan mentioned those 4 names, and I'll just tell you, Jamison Williams, I almost tweeted during the game last night, if he keeps this up, he's going to be in my top 12 dynasty wide receivers before the night's over. He was wide receiver 17 currently in my rankings. Xavier Worthy's wide receiver 18, Zay Flowers wide receiver 20, and Keon Coleman, as you said, a good buy, much cheaper, wide receiver 38. So if you guys have some names that you're wondering, like, where do they rank? You don't want to wait until tomorrow to see it. At the end of the show, we're going to answer listener questions. And if there's some names that you've got, put them in the chat. I'll go through there, and I'll tell you where we've got them ranked. Dan can tell me. We'll play a game that I think we played maybe on the first episode of FFG Dynasty. It was a really creative name: Too High, Too Low, or Just Right. You remember that, Dan?
Yes, I do.
It's a great game. I think
still
maybe
better than any game Azer's ever created on FFG.
I was going to say Azer may have come up with that one, but okay. Question number 3. What is your dynasty resolution? What will you do different or better next year?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this, Heath, and I feel like in Dynasty, and this is a mistake on my part, I don't want to say I pigeonhole myself into a strategy, Heath, but I've really come close to just locking into a mindset, let's call it, in Dynasty of I don't value running backs. I don't want them on my roster. I want receivers. I will take a tight end. I will take a quarterback, depending on the format. But I really want to build my roster through the wide receiver position and draft picks. That's how I kind of fuel the roster. But I had a conversation, Jacob, myself, and Ben Gretsch mid-season on the evolution of fantasy football. And when you really dig into this, and it really evolves, I should say, from just the evolution of actual football, the game is changing. So many defenses are playing that too high safety look, or, cover 3, cover 6, similar idea, keeping everything in front, eyes on the quarterback, keep everything underneath. And what that's invited is teams to build out their run game and build out their team through their running back. It's even invited some teams to throw to the running back more. Right. Now, I know that's kind of gone down. So I want to evolve with the times, and I want to evolve with the actual game that's changing in the NFL. And so I want to evolve my strategy this year. And I'm going to look into this offseason because I don't know how I want to do this. I don't want to just go head first into running back, but I want to evolve it to understand the value of running back and kind of factor in that, like, yes, I know if I'm making this big investment, Heath, either via trade or draft pick for a running back, it's going to possibly have a shorter shelf life than that wide receiver. But that amount of time, those years I get out of that back are going to be worth so much more than that wide receiver, given how the NFL game is changing. And yeah, the NFL game is going to keep changing, but until quarterback play gets better around the league, and it's only gotten worse according to my estimation, the passing game can't really get that much better. We need better quarterbacks. It's the reality of the situation. So I want to evolve my game to the way that the NFL has evolved.
I like that answer. And let's take a short break and we'll get into the top 12 in my Dynasty rankings.
The clock never stops. Relive the greatest moments with uninterrupted highlights and more.
It's Gareth Bale! Ronaldo! Wonderful goal!
On the UEFA Champions League channel. Streaming free.
Let's start with quarterback, Dan. The top 12 quarterbacks in my 2025 Dynasty rankings. We've even got graphics today. It's going to be fantastic. Number 1 is Josh Allen. Number 2 is Lamar Jackson. Number 3, Patrick Mahomes. Number 4, Joe Burrow. 5, Jalen Hurts. 6, Jaden Daniels. Number 7, Caleb Williams. 8, Justin Herbert. 9, Jordan Love. 10, Brock Purdy. 11, Kyler Murray. And 12, you said his name earlier in the show, Drake May. Dan, what's the first thing that stands out to you? Just jumps off the page at you.
First thing that jumps out to me is shout out Debo, because I love the graphic and I love that we got graphics. So that's just a quick shout out. But the first thing that stands out to me is, you know how I am, Heath. I am a terrible person. No, I'm not a terrible person. I just have moments and lapses of bad human. And that's going to come out now when I say, when we were on the show last year and you said, who's going to jump into my top 12 that's not there? I said Justin Herbert. No one bought into it. No one believed me. They thought the fit was bad with Harbaugh. I said it's the opposite. I said he doesn't need volume. He just needs efficiency. And that's what he's done. And so Justin Herbert stands out first to me. And I think he's going to continue to be there. And then obviously the second thing I see on this page, my boy, Drake May. I'm so happy he made your top 12, so I don't have to use him as an answer to a follow-up question.
I will say, I guess you can victory lap being right about me moving Justin Herbert into the top 12, but I think he was QB 18 this season. So I'm not sure you can victory lap what Justin Herbert actually did in terms of fantasy football production.
And that's why I love having you here, Heath, because you can bring me back down. And I deserve to be knocked back down. I'm just
okay. So
nonsense.
Drake May, you said it. He made it into the top 12, so he's not the answer to this question. Who's the best quarterback that I left out?
So this one is interesting. I'm going with a 30-year-old, and I am actually surprised to not see him on this list. It's Jared Goff. I love the infrastructure there with Detroit. They may lose Ben Johnson. I tend to think that's fine given where they're at and given where Jared Goff is at. Specifically, that offensive line is just so dominant and so reinforced with players. And then what we talked about earlier, Heath, Jameson Williams, close to cracking the top 12 at the wide receiver for both of us. So now as he continues to get better and look more and more like that player we saw on his tape at Alabama, he's got weapons there. Laporta, Jameson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Gibbs. I mean, it's phenomenal with that O-line. So just 30 years old, quarterbacks play late into their career. And quite frankly, he's playing the best football of his career right now, Jared Goff. So, and he's going to get all those dome games. So it's Goff for me.
Goff is my QB 16, actually. Okay. The guy who just missed the cut, the guy who was QB 13 for me, was the guy who changed your mind the most this year. It was Bo Nix. He was actually my QB 13, but I think Goff's a good answer. And if you were a contender next year, he probably should be a top 12 quarterback. It's a good time to remind people that I'm trying to blend with these rankings for contenders and rankings for rebuilders. I'd much rather have Jared Goff on a contending roster than a couple of the names that you see in the top 12 here. And then finally, we'll just talk about the rookies. Does Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward crack this list by this time next year?
I would love to answer this question in 2-3 months from now when I actually watch tape on these guys. I've only seen broadcast games, but broadcast can give you an idea for sure of what they bring to the table. And with that said in mind, we're looking at Tankathon right now. I looked at that before this question. Cleveland in the mix. I don't know if they'll have the cap space to go for a quarterback. Tennessee seems like a lock, so that's not exactly the fit I love, but it's not terrible. It's really not terrible, actually, with Calvin Ridley and an improving offensive line. So let's say one of them goes to Tennessee. That's the best bet possibly. I'm going to still answer no. Skill set wise, I don't really see it with either of those two.
I don't think everything I'm seeing is that these quarterbacks would have been at best QB4 in last year's class.
Yes.
Which means they're behind the top 3 that made my top 12. And I'm assuming that Drake May is either going to get an offensive tackle or a number 1 wide receiver in the draft this year. Well, if he could get both, that would be fantastic. Of course, they might just take Travis Hunter and play him at corner and that wouldn't be as good for Drake May. Let's go now to the running back position. Dan's newfound love in Dynasty is the running back position. And I want to talk a little bit. I'm going to have Dynasty tiers later in the month, but I'll give you a little bit of a peek at those as well, because this position is really tiered. The two guys at the top, Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, I would not argue with you for ranking either one of them as number one. In fact, in the formula that I used to kind of start formatting these rankings, they came out tied. They are 1A and 1B at the position, and there's a pretty decent teardrop after that for me. And then we get to Devon Achane. Kyron Williams, I expect a little bit of pushback from people on, but I don't know how you can do what he's done the last 2 seasons and be basically in the same situation going into next year and not be a top 4 Dynasty running back. Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, and then really after Bucky Irving, who knows? But Ken Walker, Josh Jacobs, and James Cook rounds up the top 12. Again, that's Robinson, Gibbs, Achane, Williams, Hall, Taylor, Barkley, Irving, Brown, Walker, Jacobs, and Cook. It's really after number 8, Dan, where I just feel like I lose all concept of who should be ranked as a top 12.
I totally understand that. I want to make it clear first. It's not a newfound love for running back. I've been very anti-running back in Dynasty. It's me trying to warm up to the idea of you need to have some running backs and you need to change your strategy a little bit as the NFL evolves. So I want to start there. My thoughts on your top 12. It's a really interesting group. I think, the one player I would probably rank higher, I should say, is Josh Jacobs. And I look at Josh Jacobs as a player who's in a really fantastic situation. We found out this year, Matt LaFleur in the past, he's had a lot of rotation at running back, not really much this year. And part of that is because Jacobs offers him something that Aaron Jones didn't offer him. And AJ, and players that he's worked with in the past don't really offer him. It's that complete skill set at the back position. He's the guy I'd have the highest. I think there's a question. I don't want to skip through because I think there's one other question that would answer the following.
Yeah, and I think Jacobs brings up a point at this position that's really difficult and interesting. Is like, what do we do with the fact that the older running backs mostly just all held up this year? Yeah. And some of them had like career years.
Right.
Josh Jacobs is going to be 27 in February. That's generally about the point where we say with a running back, you should only roster him if you're a contender.
Yep.
But we just saw Derrick Henry at 31 be awesome. We've got James Conner and Aaron Jones looking like they're still 26 years old.
Yep.
And so I wonder, like, if it's not just if part of the reason that running back's a little bit more palatable is because we've seen these 2 elite classes of running backs maintain past 27, past 28. And now, or do we get caught in the trap of expecting some non-elite classes to do that? Or is this just the marvel of modern medicine and we're going to have running backs playing for longer? It's a question that, I tell you what, we'll know the answer in 2 or 3 years. We can just guess on it now. So last year, Christian McCaffrey, Travis Etienne, and Rachaad White were all in my top 12 as of January of 2024. They fell out. Who's going to fall out of this top 12 in the next 12 months?
Yeah, I love this question. It's a fun one to unpack. So there's multiple players in here. I'm going to go for 2 that are kind of the more low-hanging fruit, the ones I think most people pick, and I'm going to go for a wild card pick. So I'll start with the more low-hanging fruit ones. I'll start with Chase Brown. Phenomenal talent, has looked great on the field, but still, day 3 draft pick. The Bengals didn't really bring in that much competition. Zach Moss, and then he got hurt. I feel like this is a team that could always bring in a different kind of back. And I do think that he was the workhorse less by design, Heath, and more by the fact that Zach Moss got hurt. And we'll look at the first few weeks to see that. Still, phenomenal talent. Love his game. Love that he can get worked in the passing game. Still think he'll have value. But if we're talking about someone who might fall off, maybe him. Another player, Kenneth Walker. Phenomenal talent. Even better talent than Chase Brown, and has the draft capital. I think early 2nd round pick by the Seahawks. But the injuries are often, I mean, they're piling up year after year, right, and he's got a great back behind him. But my wild card pick, Heath, the player I would not want on my Dynasty or All-Stars and would be looking to trade immediately, though I still think he'll probably finish in your top 12 next year, but further down, Kyron Williams.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say this. I do have faith in Sean McVay, no doubt. He's an unbelievable schemer, and he loves Kyren Williams. But here's some things about Kyren Williams that scare me. 1, his draft capital. 2, his injury history. And 3, it's really hard to find a quarterback in the NFL. And when you don't get consistent quarterback play, Brian Dable talked about this week. When you don't get consistent quarterback play on a week-to-week basis, you can't go anywhere as an offense. You just can't. And so Stafford, when is that ending? It's probably soon. And then we're left with Kyren Williams in a pretty nebulous situation from a quarterback standpoint. That's just not someone I would want to roster right now.
Yeah, I think there were people that definitely, and you brought up Chase Brown. People were making that same argument for Kyren going into this year. And Goblin in the chat says Bucky's falling out because Bucky falls in that same bucket of a day 3 running back. And the thing that is not scientific research, but Jamie and I have talked about this quite a bit, and it's mostly held true. When I get worried about the day 3 running back is when there's a coaching change.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons you don't see Tyrone Tracy in the top 12 or the top 24. And maybe, the Giants are building momentum for 2025 with their late season victories. So maybe that keeps Brian Dable's job.
Please.
And so Tyrone Tracy is safe. But I do think, I don't think the Bengals are going to change coaches. Although, if you have Joe Burrow and you miss the playoffs, maybe that's a consideration. I don't think Sean McVay's going anywhere. Tampa Bay's, I guess if they lose week 18 maybe and miss the playoffs, but I feel better about those day 3 running backs. But also this is maybe Josh Jacobs should be ahead of those guys.
Yeah.
It's also just I look at running backs 13 through 24, and I did for a long time because I didn't like the last 4 names in my top 12. And I couldn't find guys who were not in the top 12 that I felt like should be. And so I didn't give you this question beforehand, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it now anyways. Is there a name you're not seeing here that you think is definitely a top 12 dynasty running back?
Ooh, this one on the fly without preparation is a little tougher, but I will take a quick peek you mentioned one already that I would consider. It's Tyrone Tracy. I know there's a potential coaching change going on there, but likely from what we've heard, the GM is going to be back, and the GM's mindset at running back, it leads me to believe that Tracy will enter at least the next season as the RB1. And by that point, I think he'll be able to establish himself. He's been phenomenal. Just from a pure talent standpoint, looking at the efficiency metrics, Jacob Gibbs has a ton of great stats on this. He's proven himself in my mind to be an every down back, minus the fumbling issue, which he'll have to clean up. So Tracy would definitely be someone that comes to mind first. A couple other guys I could throw in there potentially. Isaiah Pacheco, maybe, not sure. Brian Robinson, like the fit, like the situation, but not sure on that either. Don't feel great about either of those two, but they're just two players.
That's kind of where we're at though. It's there are not 12 running backs, which here you go. We're going to have some more coming. And
we're talking about rookies.
One of them is going to be Ashton Genty. My rule, if you're new here for the rookies, is I'm going to add them to my dynasty rankings after the NFL draft.
Yeah.
I'll have rookie rankings earlier, but I'm not going to put them into these rankings. Still, we expect Ashton Genty is going to be the first running back drafted. If he's drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, where would you put him in these rankings?
This is a fun question. For now, I'm saying RB8. That seems like a cop-out based on your breakdown earlier about how it does feel we feel comfortable with the top 7. But I could easily, and by the way, that top 7 for me would be the same as yours minus Kyren and add Josh Jacobs. But I could easily be convinced to move him higher depending on the fit.
I was thinking 4, and if I like the fit, it might be 3.
Okay.
Definitely not top 2. But you would not have to, especially with the way that Achane's finishing the season, Nick, you would not have to do much arm twisting at all for me to put Genty ahead of Devon Achane. I'm excited. He might not be the only rookie running back that shows up in these top 12. With the way I feel about 9 through 12 in these rankings, we might have 3 or 4 rookie running backs that crack the top 12.
And it's early, Heath, but this is projected to be one of the stronger running back classes we've had in quite some time.
I'm excited about it. It's great because you've got an early pick in YOLO.
Yes.
So you can bring your New Year's resolution into fruition by drafting a running back with the 2nd overall pick, something you probably never thought that you would do. Let's get to the top 12 wide receivers. And again, it's the top 2, and then it's the rest, right? Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, these guys, well, CeeDee Lamb cracked the top 2, I think, for a week or 2. But one of these guys has been number 1 for pretty much the last 3 years. Chase with an incredible season. Justin Jefferson might break some records in week 18 playing against this miserable Lions defense for the conference, for the bye. Like, I can't wait to see what Jefferson does in this game. So it's Chase and Jefferson at the top. Malik Neighbors is number 3 for me. Puka Nacua is number 4. CeeDee Lamb has fallen to number 5, and I don't know if that's justified or not, but man, I don't want to sleep on how good Puka Nacua has been the last 2 years either. Amon-Ra St. Brown is number 6. Brian Thomas Jr. has climbed all the way to number 7. Nico Collins at 8. Jackson Smith and Jigba, remember when he was a rookie loser? He's now wide receiver 9. Ladd McConkey, wide receiver 10. Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver 11. Jordan Addison, wide receiver 12. That's Chase, Jefferson, Neighbors, Nacua, Lamb, St. Brown, Thomas, Collins, JSN, McConkey, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Jordan Addison. We've already got a comment in the chat about Ladd McConkey. And so I don't feel any reservation about having elevated Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. Did I go too far in moving Ladd McConkey ahead of Marvin?
No, you didn't go too far at all. If you look at some of the numbers from Ladd McConkey, Jacob Gibbs again has some of these. I don't have them handy. Wish I did, but you can check his page. They're phenomenal. And then just the film. That's what I can go off of, Heath, because I've seen a lot of it. This guy uncovers to a crazy extent. And I talked about this on a Beyond the Box Score maybe 3 weeks ago with Jacob. When you watch his tape, you start to see the early, and it's early because they haven't had a lot of time working together, Heath, especially because McConkey missed some time in camp with an injury. And that's some of the issue with his profile, by the way. The injuries are an issue. But you see the early glimpses of that anticipatory throwing between him and Herbert. He's not even out of his break, and Herbert has the ball released. Those out routes are almost unguardable. You talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown as a player who has some routes that are unguardable. A few of the other guys on this list have some routes that are unguardable. The out routes with McConkey and Herbert are going to become unguardable. So I do not think you have him too high. And I will say this, looking at this list, Heath, I look at that top 8 and I'm like, you know what? Maybe I can't change my strategy and go running back because these guys are so good. Like, I want a piece of that. I want to take a chance on somebody who, my draft pick, who can become one of those 8 players, because those 8 guys, top 8, are just so much better to me in Dynasty, worth so much more than really anyone. So you mentioned like how good this list is, and it's incredible. I love it. But Garrett Wilson, Drake London, and A.J. Brown didn't make the list. That's my wide receiver 13, 14, and 15. Did I make a mistake leaving one of those guys out? I think so. For me, and it's funny that I'm going to say this, but I'm a little bit low. Addison, I'd probably put one. I would definitely put, well, let me see how I want to phrase this. I would definitely have one of them over Addison. Probably all 3 that you mentioned. And there are other guys on this list I'm not as sold on as you maybe. Marvin Harrison Jr., one of them. And that's not as much on him as it is on Kyler and the situation I don't love. JSN, another one. I like it. But again, the guy I would have probably the highest of those 3 is Drake London. And here's Drake London's stats so far with Michael Penix Jr. at quarterback, who, by the way, I think will be very good for Drake London's fantasy value moving forward in Dynasty. Drake London with Michael Penix, small sample size, but he has a 34% target share and a 40% air yardage share. He's running different routes with Penix. He's being utilized at different areas of the field, and he's becoming the wide receiver I saw on tape at USC. And I've seen that at times. Like he was used more like that with Arthur Smith, but just Mariota and Ritter just couldn't get him the ball. Penix has arm talent. Penix can get him the football in different areas of the field. And so he's the one I'm most excited about, but I would have Garrett Wilson above here too. I know the situation's ugly there, but the talent is just immense there. You know, something interesting, and I put this out, I think it was on Blue Sky yesterday. It might have been on Twitter, but Jordan Addison over the past 2 seasons has scored more PPR fantasy points per game than Drake London. And you think, well, Drake London's had some really bad quarterbacks. Yeah. But if I would have told you coming into this year, like Jordan Addison's going to play 17 games with Sam Darnold, or 16 games, or actually 14, I think it was, because a couple of injuries. Like, we didn't think that Sam Darnold was a even good quarterback before this year.
Jordan Addison has scored 19 touchdowns in his first 2 years in the NFL. Drake London has not scored 19 touchdowns in his first 3 years in the NFL. And Drake London hasn't scored a touchdown with Michael Penix yet, which I think I'm anticipating might still be a problem next year. Just because, like, we see it with the inexperienced quarterbacks. We see it with often rookies struggle in the red zone and getting the ball into the end zone through the air their first year as a starter.
You know what? So, you've made good points there. I think I'm reevaluating this. I honestly do feel that way because you talk about, like, in Dynasty, you like to look into coaching continuity. Right. In Minnesota, Kevin O'Connell isn't going anywhere, and Kevin O'Connell's done such a phenomenal job. So environment-wise, and the stats back it up, like you said with Addison, and the fact that he's always going to have pretty much single coverage because of Justin Jefferson there, which is phenomenal for him. And Darnold is really good at diagnosing that. Darnold's playing great football. Now, I'll say this. I'm higher on Addison if they re-sign Darnold. I'm lower considerably on Addison if they go to J.J. McCarthy.
Okay.
Reasons you just mentioned. But I think Darnold's playing phenomenal football.
Yeah, I think my expectation is probably going to be if O'Connell lets Darnold walk, that we're going to see McCarthy be just about as good as O'Connell as Darnold was. Because I didn't think Darnold was any good.
But I understand that.
And remember, like, Nick Mullins was throwing for 3. Yeah. I mean, how many great games did Jordan Addison have with Nick?
Standpoint, right? You're talking from a fantasy standpoint,
right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see it being close. I just think Darnold's doing a lot of things that are really good to help move the football from a processing standpoint.
About these rankings, you see Malik Neighbors at number 3. Do I have to move him down a couple of spots if the Giants beat the Eagles this week?
Well, it's hard to say because they're going to go through some different options. And I honestly feel like, as crazy as it is based on how bad he looked this year, again, not much removed from the injury, which I think he'll get better as he's more removed. The best bet might just be to sign Jameis or Kirk Cousins as far as Malik Neighbors' fantasy value goes.
If Malik Neighbors, like, how about sign Jameis and Joe Flacco?
Sure. And I mean, for his value, like, that's probably better than getting Shador or Cam Ward. You know what I'm saying? If they had the number 1 overall pick and they hadn't won these games. Yep. So I'm not ready to do it yet. If they punt the quarterback position like Joe Shane did this year with Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, and Daniel Jones, the worst quarterback room I've ever seen enter a season, then yeah, it's going to be like that. But I feel like they got to learn from that mistake, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You just said, I've got to go look this up. And we won't take too long for this. But you just said the worst quarterback room I've ever seen to open the season. Yes. And I'm just trying to think the year before, was it the Todd Haley year that the Chiefs had Tyler Thigpen and Brock Heward and Brody Croyle?
Oh God, they entered a year with that?
Damon Heward, Brody Croyle, Tyler Thigpen combined to throw 563 passes.
Oh my God. So I am definitely wrong with my take here. But I can't believe a team entered a year with that.
And somehow Tony Gonzalez still had 1,100 yards.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
There you go. We will get to the tight end position right after this break. You been playing any golf lately, Dan?
It's over, Heath. The dream is over. It's been freezing. Courses are closed. I have done for the first time in my life, I've done a simulator a couple times. I'm going to hot take here. I'm not a fan of the simulator. It's fine. Like, I'll do it if I'm bored on a night, but it's not golf. It doesn't feel like golf. I need to see the ball travel off the club. I don't want to see it hit a screen and be like, that was 150 straight. Like, no, I don't need that.
Was that your 3-wood or your 5-wood? Okay, we got the top 12 tight ends. And I talked about the top 2 at each position being a tier. There might be 3 tiers in the first 3 players in these rankings. Brock Bowers is number 1 on an island by himself.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe a top 5 pick in startup drafts. Trey McBride is number 2 on an island by himself, maybe a first-round pick in a startup draft. Yeah. Sam Laporta is a clear number 3. I don't think we could debate anything about that. And then it gets a little bit questionable. I would put Mark Andrews, George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson kind of all into one little bubble. And then I'm not sure there's another tight end that I want to roster in Dynasty, but the back half of my top 12, Dalton Kincaid, Tucker Kraft, Kyle Pitts, yes, somehow still, David Njoku, Travis Kelce, at least until February 15th, and Jatavian Sanders. Woof. Like, have you ever seen a graphic? Because you think most leagues are 12-team leagues, right? That illustrates the haves and the have-nots more than this one right here. If you're in a dynasty league and you have one of the guys on the left, you have life. If you have one of the guys on the right, well, thank you, Travis Kelce, for the championship this week that turned back the clock for one game. I believe you will do it for the next 3 games. But if you have one of the guys on the right, you're almost drawing dead.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with you. It's funny. This was supposed to be the year of the tight end, Heath. As far as dynasty startups go, because I can apply this to redraft, I've made it clear to myself, and I told Jacob this last week, I will not, and I repeat, I will not fall for this trap again in drafts next year. I will not be using a mid-round pick, 4th round, 4, 5, 6 on the next guy at tight end when I could be getting a James Conner, or I could be getting a Brian Robinson, or one of these backs that can actually help me win, or receiver. So I've done that in Dynasty. You know, I'll still fall for the trap because I do like watching tape, and I love Kincaid's tape, right? Like, I have guys that I love on tape. Luke Musgrave, who has been injured and hasn't hit. Tucker Kraft had great tape at South Dakota State as well. So I'll probably fall for that trap again, Heath, but you're right. It's an interesting position in Dynasty. We have, I would even say, less so than like the left versus the right here. It's really like those top 3. And I'd honestly even argue just the top 2 are separated so far above any other position we just went over, Bowers and McBride. I don't feel great about Laporte. I guess I'm okay with it. And then we're at guys already like Andrews, Kittle, and Hawkinson, who are older, right? Especially Kittle and Andrews. And so we're already kind of losing some steam there, it feels like.
Yeah, I don't know if Gibbs told you this on one. I know you guys do a lot of podcasts together, and I know I really kind of ruffled his feathers a little bit in our tight end premium league when I tried to trade for Dalton Kincaid at a discount, and he basically called it an insulting offer.
That's
and and so we had a little back and forth because I get kind of annoyed when somebody says it's an insulting offer. And he said, this season would have gone different if I'd just taken Trey McBride there. I said, yeah, Trey McBride's good. Like, what? You said you like the tape for Dalton Kincaid.
This college tape. Let me make that clear.
The college tape.
Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't make me feel near as good. I thought you were going to give me some things from his play in the NFL to make me feel good about the fact that he just turned 75 targets into 448 yards.
So bad. No, it's what you said. It's the college tape where I was excited about him, and it's how I thought he'd be used at the NFL level based on how he won at the college level. He just isn't used that way at all in this Buffalo scheme, and they're not going to make a change at coordinator, and they shouldn't because this offense works. So for me, like, if this is how he's going to be used at the NFL level, I'm sure there'll be some evolution, right? They invested in him, but I don't know. And if this is how he's used, I'm just not as excited as I used to be about him. I still want to buy into the talent, though, Heath. I don't want to rule someone out after 2 years based on, I mean, look, when he was in college, he was essentially their big slot receiver, and he was essentially their entire offense. That's what had me so excited about him. He won underneath over and over and over again, kind of similar to how we see Trey McBride win, to be completely honest. Only Kincaid didn't join an offense that's going to use him like the Arizona Cardinals use Trey McBride. He joined a completely different scheme, and that matters. So it's just, I don't want to jump off this yet, but it's tough given like how Buffalo uses him.
Dalton Kincaid had 6 different games this year where he had 7 or more targets. That's pretty good for a tight end, right?
Right.
He did not reach 60 receiving yards once in any of those games.
That's really bad.
I don't understand it, but enough of that, because I agree. Like, people are asking in the chat, like, I don't want to just move on from Kincaid. No, you can't. It's sunk cost. Just hold on and hope that next year's better, because he is with Josh Allen. But more pressing, please, for tomorrow's article, give me anybody else to rank at tight end 12 that's not named Jatavian Sanders.
Well, I would say this. I got some deeper dives, but for me, Evan Ingram should be in the top 12 on this list, just given his contract situation. Trevor Lawrence coming back and the rapport he built with Lawrence. So he would be probably someone I would put in there over Jadavian Sanders. But for, lesser veteran type plays, I got two. The first would be Jonnu Smith. I mean, look, I don't know what's going to happen with Jonnu this offseason, but Jonnu looks pretty damn good on the football field. He moves incredibly well after the catch, and he's proven he can be a weapon for fantasy this year and for the Dolphins. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him come back there on a team-friendly-ish deal or, giving him a nod, like, we'll pay you a little bit more than you've been making in your NFL career. So he's one. And then for the deepest dive, Heath, this is the one that's most interesting to me, Isaiah Likely. So the reason I like this is Likely has been a phenomenal talent on the football field and great on a per-touch basis, just isn't involved a lot, right? Well, Mark Andrews' contract is up after this next season, and they've got a lot of guys they have to pay, the Baltimore Ravens. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them move on from Andrews after his contract runs up. And now you have a guy in Likely who you could get really cheap, who will still be under contract, I believe, at that point, maybe in his final year, and then could have that breakout year.
So Jonnu, I considered, and I just have a philosophical rule. He's my tight end 19. I have a philosophical rule that if a guy has a career year at age 29 or age 30, I don't buy it. Right? I'm not going to buy it for the next year. And sometimes those guys do it again. But I'm not going to buy it. So I understand why, if you want to buy it though, makes perfect sense. Isaiah Likely is actually my number 13 tight end. So he was the guy who was closest. I think I'm going to take that suggestion, Dan. And when the article comes out, Isaiah Likely will be tight end 12. And I'm just going to clip.
No love for Evan Ingram.
No love at all for Evan Ingram, who will turn 31 before he plays another football game.
That's fair.
Has averaged fewer than 7 yards per target in 5 of his last 6 seasons. Has not scored more than 4 touchdowns in a year since 2017.
Ooh.
And looking at the contract, he does have $13 million worth of dead money on the cap for next year. So they're probably going to keep him, but they would save $7 million by cutting him. And he has a $19 million cup hit.
Yeah. And Strange has looked pretty good behind him, and they drafted him. So, all great points. I would move him back off that list.
So I've made a couple references to Travis Kelce winning the Super Bowl and then retiring, but let's say maybe the Chiefs lose somehow and Travis Kelce doesn't retire. If he announces he's returning for the 2025 season, how much higher should I have him? He's currently my tight end 11.
First of all, hearing the name Travis Kelce gives me shell shock because I went against my grain and I went against my rule of sticking to the process, keeping my picks, even though I'm a contender. And I traded you my first round pick for Kelce and Connor. And I just immediately regret that. I didn't win the league. I got screwed. Jalen Hurts got hurt. And now I'm looking at it like, was it worth it? No, it was not worth it. I want that first round pick back. Thank God I didn't give you Brian Thomas for those guys. That was your original offer. That was never happening. And you're like, the chat told you that you should make this trade.
The chat did.
Guess what? I'm glad I didn't listen to the chat. Because if I had traded Brian Thomas,
who was that?
If I had traded Brian, the chat said this is a ripoff for Dan. He's got to do it. If I traded Brian Thomas for Travis Kelce and James Conner, I might just quit the league out of shame at this point. But let me just start by saying that. As far as your question goes, though, with regards to Travis Kelce, how much higher would I rank him? Like, not that much higher, Heath. I think what ended up happening this year is what you predicted would happen, and a lot of people who were closer to the Chiefs situation predicted, and I was wrong on, which is they're not really using him until the playoffs. I'm going to watch, and I'm going to see, and if he looks like old Travis Kelce in the playoffs this year, just like last year, I'm going to be like, this is a plan. They are doing something like specifically to keep him healthy for these playoff runs. So for me, I'm kind of out on Kelce now for good.
And there was that stretch when they lost Rice and they hadn't added Hopkins yet, and Worthy wasn't quite ready, where he did have week 5, 70 yards, week 7, 90 yards, week 8, 100 yards. Like,
right.
He had a little stretch, and then he stepped up for all of us in the fantasy championship, scoring 22 fantasy points against the Steelers of all teams. So I do think he still has it. I think you were right about that. It's just, How exciting is it to think about the fact that Patrick Mahomes might have Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy at full speed heading into next year?
And they might get it. I would do it if I were him. He's a free agent, I believe, but Hollywood Brown signing on a team-friendly deal just to revalue. Like, he doesn't have value heading into free agency. If he does 1 year with Mahomes, he could get value for that next year heading into free agency.
So those are the top 12 at every position. If you go to cbssports.com/fantasy tomorrow, you will see a top 50 at quarterback, a top 50 at tight end, a top 80 at running back, a top 100 at wide receiver. And we'll have links to the trade charts, which will be over at Sportsline, as they always are. I am so excited to release those. We've got a couple of minutes left here for some chat questions, some names that you guys want to know, like where does this guy rank? And I love Matt for bringing this one up. Let's talk Mims, Marvin Mims. I was really high on him coming out of college. He was mostly been a disaster and a flop. I blame Sean Payton, but that was a good showing. I just got a glimmer of hope from Marvin Mims. Looked like the guy that I thought he was in their most recent victory. And in the updated rankings, he is currently wide receiver 65 for me. I have him just ahead of Jalen Polk, just ahead of his teammate Troy Franklin, just ahead of Adonai Mitchell, just ahead of Jermaine Burton. Too high, too low, or just right for Marvin Mims, Dan?
I think that's just right. It's hard for me to buy into him as somebody who we're going to have consistent value from, even though I do like the evolution of that offense. So I think I'm okay with that one.
Other Matt. You're both the number one Matt, and I appreciate you both. Matt Walter says, Derrick Henry, what do I do with him? I've got him at RB 17 in the Dynasty rankings, just behind McCaffrey, Kamara, and Chuba. These are full PPR rankings. Just ahead of David Montgomery, Pacheco, and Charbonnet. Too high, too low, or just right?
No, that's just right for me. Though, look, we looked at him this year and we said, or some of us looked at him this year, not me, but some of us looked at him and said, look, all the data suggests this is a bad buy for fantasy. But there are outliers in this sport, and Derrick Henry, man, is the biggest outlier I've ever seen play the sport. I really do believe that. Yeah. I think for my money, he's the best athlete I've ever watched play football. If you're 260, 31 years old with thousands of carries and hits on your record, and you're still outrunning safeties and beating safeties angles for 80-yard touchdown runs like we've seen him do this year, you are the best athlete, and to me, that I've ever watched play the sport. Just from what I consider an athlete. It's like my LeBron James argument. When you're 6'9", 270, and you can move like that, you're the best athlete ever. So I'm not going to bet against him, and I would potentially maybe move my spot or two higher. He's just somebody I would want on my roster at this point.
Well, maybe if you're going to move into your running back era,
yes,
Derrick Henry, someone you want to add in the YOLO league. I don't have any picks in this upcoming draft. We can have a discussion about that. I want to give Matt a shout out because I called him Other Matt. Second place in the greatest league name ever, FFT Fans Only Dynasty League.
I love it.
FFT Fans Only. Congratulations on second place, Matt.
We got
to enjoy the seconds as well. I reject this idea that if you don't finish this season first overall, it was just a bad year. This is, I think, a great name. Jalen McMillan, and it's with or without Godwin's return. He was one of the most difficult wide receivers for me to rank. What do you do with the guy who has like a 4-game stretch like this at the end of the year? And we don't know what Godwin's status is going to be, although McMillan's maybe made it easier for Tampa Bay to let him go. I have Jalen McMillan at wide receiver 39, just behind Jaden Reed and Keon Coleman. Looking at the younger guys because it doesn't do any good to compare him to the older guys. Well, just ahead of Jerry Jeudy and Xavier Leggett.
I think it's about exactly where I'd have him, actually. And that's not to say I'm not high on him. He's had a steady drumbeat. He had an unbelievable training camp. We kind of poo-pooed it as like third receiver on the Bucs. This won't be much for redraft. Obviously, the injury changed that. The injury to Godwin changed that. Godwin's an older player. Evans is an older player. Love the talent. And I love what I've seen from a rapport standpoint this early with Baker Mayfield. And we got to get to the point now, Heath, where and this was one guy we didn't talk about and probably could have been argued to be in that top 12 at quarterback. We got to give the respect that's due to Baker Mayfield. He is throwing the football. Now, I hope he keeps Liam Cohen because I think Liam Cohen's playing a big role in that.
But he just lost his offensive coordinator.
But he did. You're right. He did just go. That's a great point. Everybody said, "Oh no, he lost Dave Canales. What's going to happen?" And things got ultimately even better for him from a fantasy standpoint. And he's throwing more of those vertical intermediate routes, which he can throw. The arm talent's always been there for him. So now the timing's great. He's playing confidently. So yeah, I like McMillan based on the quarterback situation and the rapport that's going to build.
I would say if Godwin is like signed somewhere else, or we definitely find out that he's gone, then McMillan may move up 5 to 10 spots.
Fair.
Wouldn't be surprised if he cracks the top 30 in that situation. We got a couple more here real quick. Oh, more Dynasty content weekly, please, Heath.
You're gonna get a lot.
Your wish is my command. Let me tell you what the schedule is going to be like. So next week on Monday, we're going to do a special Monday mock draft, not a rookie mock, a full startup mock, the first one of 2025. It will be live. Jacob Gibbs will be here. I'm not sure who else will be here, but it's going to be a good time. And then I'm going to take about 10 days off. So the following week, we're going to have a special Friday show. And then after that, we're going Tuesday and Friday every week for the rest of the off season, except for when I take a vacation. I'm not sure when that's going to be yet, but yes, Tuesdays and Fridays, we're going to 2 shows a week. And I may even push when we get to April, when we get close to the draft, maybe we'll get a third show 1 week or 2 weeks. You guys like that? Tell me if you'd like that, and we will try to make it happen.
Like that.
Is Rashee Rice.
And one more thing on that front, just so for those who don't know, there's also going to be a ton of written content. So he's just talking about the podcast. Check out the site because he's going all in from a written standpoint on what you're going to have. And those are all resources that you can leverage. I think the most valuable one to me, at least, is the trade charts for both 2 QB, Superflex, and then 1 QB. Just such a good reference for me to have in the offseason. And I've used it throughout the season as well. So you'll have that updated as well, I think, this week.
Just don't use that if you're playing in a league with me and say, hey, your trade chart says you would do this. Rashee Rice, is he top 15? I currently have him at wide receiver 22. That's probably a little bit low. I'd like to hear that he's 100% healthy. I'd like to hear the length of his suspension.
Yeah.
He probably is a guy who's going to be top 15 at some point, assuming we don't get a worst case scenario on either the injury front or the suspension front. And do we have one more? We got one more. Chig Okonkwo. Why didn't we mention him when it could have been a top 12 tight end? He's my tight end 22. I like him more than Evan Ingram, but every time I think about counting on Chig Okonkwo, he scores 8 fantasy points.
I know. And I just, it's so uncertain at quarterback still there. I think they'll probably get Shador, but I don't know what they're going to do, Tennessee, at the 2nd overall pick. So yeah, it's not for me yet.
Dan, thank you for being here. Thank you for going through the rankings with me. Thank you to Debo for putting them. Thomas, actually, shout out to Shafee T, who's not here today, but did put the graphics together. Debo ran the graphics. Appreciate that. Thank you to everybody in the chat who had questions. I'll say it once again because it's the end of the year. Thank you guys for helping to make this a successful show and allowing us to do more Dynasty content next year, because that only happens if the stuff we're doing now is working, and it is. So we're going to bring you more. And if you guys could just remember to go to Spotify and to give us 5 stars and to give us a review. In January, I'll be doing a Spotify review question mailbag. So you put 5 stars, you ask a question, I'll answer your question on the podcast in January. We won't talk to you next Tuesday. We'll talk to you next Monday with a Monday mock draft.